Hey, how are you doing? How do you feel? Do you feel as though you know what to look for? You have hopefully after today and next week, you'll have a strategy for how to do this. So let's go through it. Now, this one, you might remember I was talking about this before, and I was talking about with respect to Obama. And this was their third debate. And it was the one Romney was not supposed to apparently did not do as well, and Obama did much better.
Mr. President of Tulane University, good to be with you. I'm optimistic about the future. I'm excited about our prospects as a nation. I want to see peace. I want to see growing peace in this country. It's our objective. We have an opportunity to have real leadership. America is going to have that kind of leadership and continue to promote principles of peace will make the world a safer place and make people in this country more confident that their future is secure. I also want to make sure that we get this economy going. And there are two very different paths the country can take. One is a path represented by the president, which at the end of 4 years would mean we'd have $20 trillion in debt heading towards Greece. I'll get us on track to a balanced budget. The president's path will mean continuing declining in take-home pay. I want to make sure our take-home pay turns around and starts to grow. The president's path means 20 million people out of work, struggling for a good job. I'll get people back to work with 12 million new jobs. I'm going to make sure that we get people off of food stamps, not by cutting the program, but by getting them good jobs. America's going to come back. And for that to happen, we're going to have a president who can work across the aisle. I was in a state where my legislature was 87% Democrat. I learned how to get along on the other side of the aisle. We've got to do that in Washington. Washington is broken. I know what it takes to get this country back, and we'll work with good Democrats and good Republicans to do that. This nation is the hope of the earth. We've been blessed by having a nation that's free and prosperous thanks to the contributions of the greatest generation that held a torch for the world to see, the torch of freedom and hope and opportunity. Now it's our turn to take that torch. I'm convinced we'll do it. We need strong leadership. I'd like to be that leader with your support. I'll work with you. I'll lead you in an open and honest way. And I ask for your vote. I'd like to be the next president of the United States to support and help this great nation and to make sure that we all together maintain America as the hope of the earth. Thank you so much.
Okay, what are your, this is begin your discussion by talking about framing the text within the context of the situation. What are your expectations, given the typical features of text in occurring in that kind of context? Just say typical features of text occurring in that kind of context. What would you be looking for? You'd be looking for, and I mentioned this already, you'd be looking for him to be making a point as to how he differs from the other candidate. You probably would expect some kind of antithesis statement. Is it going to be very first person? Well, let's see. Is it very first person? And what kind of processes are taking place? What would we expect? We would expect someone to be telling us about them, why we would think they're the better candidate. Why are they better? What are they going to do? What are they going to accomplish? So let's look at transitivity. You have the process types: material, mental, verbal, relational, behavioral, existential. Who or what is in the ER role? Who's the initiator? Who's the doer in the text? So this is what you're looking at. So what can you begin to do? If it were me, I'd begin by taking a look at, in the text itself, adding up. How many material processes are there? It's just simple adding them up. How many mental, how many relational? We do have a verbal process. I guess we do have one existential process. So add up the processes. And that's very simple. That's very straightforward. I look at who are the initiators. And in this case, one thing, what are you going to look for as far as who's the initiator? Well, I is going to figure in here. We, how does he get you to be identifying with him? So I'm going to look at how many occurrences of I. Now, I sometimes is I want to do this. Well, I'm taking want as a kind of mental process, but I is also the doer. So in this case, I want to do, I want to get. Well, that's why I have the I in parentheses, because it isn't mentioned, it's elliptic, but it is part of one of the processes. It is an initiator. Likewise with we. So I counted, my math sometimes isn't correct, so forgive me if you find different totals. 30 occurrences of I. 14, we. First person plural. All right, so this is a beginning. This is the first step. But I'd also do a table. A table for me to be able to look at in terms of how many being or relational processes are there. There's 25. How many are done by the first person, I? How many are done by first person plural, we? And I find, according to my totals, I find 6 out of the 25 relational processes are done by I, 24%. Doing, 26%, compared to we, very similar, 19.5. In other words, the I and the we, in terms of relational material processes, the percentages are quite similar. But the totals, we can see that it is much more, 34% is a first person singular, I. It's about I. What he will do, I am excited, I am hopeful, all those. I want to do this, I want to do that. 55% is doing material. Make a table like this. Make a table to show what are the totals that you find, what are the percentages. I and we make up half of the doing, or the initiators of the various processes. Now, we've seen things similar, so that's why I say I compare with like Susan Rice. So you remember we talked about her and the I and the we and the you. You'll notice there isn't any you in Romney's speech, because it's not him trying to get you to do something. He doesn't even tell you to vote for him. He says, I want your vote. He doesn't tell you what to do. It's I, it's we together. That I can compare then with Susan Rice's, and 71% of it was I, you, and we. The you, 32% of it. Now that would fit a commencement speech, because a commencement speech is talking to an audience in which you are trying to motivate to do something, to take their degree and to be able to go ahead and to develop themselves. So that is a very much different than what we see here in this sort of debate performance. Trump. Well, you'll notice we said a lot in terms of when he was talking to the CIA is very much first person. We did notice that. Extraordinarily so. When he was giving his speech to Congress, it was much less first person. It was much more we than I. Because in this kind of context, you wouldn't expect it to be very much about first person. It's not about the I. It's what you want the country to do. It's what you want the people to do. It's not one person. All right, so if you take a look at the text, now it's not just looking at the data tables. It's also looking at what do you notice about, for example, when I look at this first paragraph here, I see peace, peace, peace. That's repeated. That lexical cohesion, that repetition is identifying a very important element of this particular paragraph. The other is leadership, leadership. So that's going to be helpful when we think later about how does this sort of form into a kind of structure, a rhetorical structure. And the last part, safer, confident, secure, the positive words that are being used. Something that you can't do, sorry, when you're in the exam, but which I did was to do a word cloud. Because I was interested in the first paragraph, what stood out? Well, I could see peace, all right? Sorry, no electronic equipment during the exam. You can bring in anything, hard copy, but no computers. So print it out, all right? Whatever you want. Peace stood out. What about the second paragraph? Two very different paths. And we notice that one is a path, the president's path, the president's path. We are seeing here very much like what we've just been looking at in those emails about asking for money. Antithesis. The president's path, my path. The president's path, my path. A very similar structure. And you'll notice it's about take-home pay.
We have investigated the situation and confirmed that this was a false alarm. We regret any inconvenience caused. Thank you.
請注意，事故經調查後證實為警鐘誤鳴，不便之處敬請原諒，多謝。請注意，事故經調查後證實為警鐘誤鳴，不便之處敬請原諒，謝謝。
Okay. Okay. Path. This is in this, looking at the second paragraph. Yeah, you can't do a word count, and you can look at words that repeat. You can look at that kind of explanation. What? Ask yourself, what gives texture to the text? You're looking for those patterns, and those patterns aren't just in your tables. The patterns are in the choices of words as well. These were the other paragraphs. I'm going to go to the logical. All right, that's transitive. You're looking at the process types. You're looking at who's the initiator. The counting. You're looking at it. You're looking at the percentages. Bring a calculator. All right. You probably can make good use of it. Logical. What are you going to do here? Remember when we looked at Nixon and Obama, we were looking at them in terms of the amount of parataxes versus hypotaxes. We were looking at the use of simple versus complex clauses. I do the same here. And what I'd be looking at would be, for example, how many simple versus complex. How can you count how many simple clauses there are? If it is a simple clause, you'll see no kind of parataxis or hypotaxis. It'll be empty. So if I count here, I say I find 18 simple clauses. I find 17 complex clauses. Do you know what a complex clause is? You have an independent and a dependent clause, hypotactic, or two clauses joined by conjunction and or something like that, right?
Okay, so what does this number tell me? Well, interestingly, it doesn't sort of not what my expectations are with, for example, the main speeches. You remember we looked at Obama. That's why I say you need to compare. What I'm expecting you to do is to take what you have already observed, take those observations, use them as a basis for the text that you're looking at next. So it's cumulative. It's taking a look at what you've got. Nixon, second inaugural, 11% simple, 5%, 18, 51%, almost half-half. That was very much like Nixon's departure speech when he was speaking like off the cuff, remember? He wasn't prepared. I mean, it wasn't a prepared statement. He was just giving the talk to the White House staff. And that was what we say. That was very typical of spoken discourse. So what is Romney doing here? He is giving a talk that is more speech-like because he is in a debate. Now, of course, that final closing statement that the candidates give, they have prepared that. That is prepared text. That's been drafted before. That's they memorized. They speak it out. But it is given, it's been drafted in such a way as to almost have that same quality of like speaking. So he would be like speaking to his audience. Paratactic versus hypotactic. Well, on this side, though, it is very much the pattern of what we expect. It is largely hypotactic, very much less paratactic. And that's what you can count here. That's what you can look for. Theme. All right, you got your theme table, and this had been already something which I had mentioned previously in terms of the analysis of theme. And this is Romney's third debate. In the third debate, this part here. So we had 38% was I, 22% was we. Remember, this is theme, though. This is not the in the transitivity. It's not the in the ER role. It will be in the ER role. It's probably theme, but what is theme may not be all of the instances of I, or there may have been somebody else's theme. What are you looking at? What is a functionally significant span of text? It exhibits the properties of being cohesive. What is a text? A text is cohesive and coherent. A text has an architecture. An architecture formed by the relating of functionally significant spans, which themselves are identifiable from their texture, their cohesiveness. All right, let's try something. I'm not going to do all of the text now, but can we do just the first two paragraphs? What is the rhetorical structure? What is the rhetorical structure? So we begin with this 1016. And that's really just
Attention, please. We have investigated the situation and confirmed that this was a false alarm. We regret any inconvenience caused. Thank you.
請注意，事故經調查後證實為警鐘誤鳴，不便之處敬請原諒，多謝。請注意，事故經調查後證實為警鐘誤鳴，不便之處敬請原諒，謝謝。
Okay. I didn't even know there was an alarm. Did any of you hear an alarm? Anyways, just as well. All right. Now, this 116 is really a kind of, we just take the 1017, 1022. Obviously, this sort of greeting is not the main thing, right? This is the core. And this is a kind of, I would use the relation preparation. Sort of prepare the audience for what they are about to hear. It's sort of as the greeting and so forth. Now, what about 1017? I'm optimistic about the future. I'm excited about our prospects as a nation. And then he goes on to talk about peace. So I see that we have sort of 1017, 1018. I am, and then this part here, the rest of it, I want. And I see these as sort of, in a way, joint. There are three things here. Now, 119 to 122, two things here strike me. One is the peace, and the other is the leadership. Those were two obvious themes here. How would I break this down further then? Well, I want to see peace, 119. One, 2, 0. I want to see growing peace. And what about the rest of 21 and 22? 21 begins where he's now notice something. You notice it shifted. It was I. And now it is we. So this was all beforehand was about I. And now 21 and 22 is about we in America, the country, the people. All right. What is it that we see here in 121, 22? This is about the leadership aspect. This is about the peace aspect. But what am I basing this on? I'm basing it on, in many ways, just the use of the repetition of lexical items like peace, leadership, which obviously give a theme, but at the same time was also first person singular here, and it's all what I want, and now it's we, and it's shifting. Now, I'm not going to go down further. Of course, I could. It's not necessary for me to do so. I've made the point already. The next paragraph, let's just go through that. This one is quite easy. Now, what I'd like you to do is draw it out yourself for a minute. Honestly, you will never figure this out until you try to start to do it yourself. You can watch me do it many times, but you'll never figure it out. Try to do that. This paragraph, 358, this is easy. Okay, it's really easy. What do you see in 123A? I also want. There's a paratactic here. What was the first paragraph? I want peace. I want to see peace. I also want. And what does he want here? What's this paragraph about? The economy. He wants to see peace. He wants to see prosperity. Okay. Now, that part there, then, 123, again, is how are we going to see this economy grow? Well, he's going to talk about here that there are two paths, two means to do this. And so how is he going to be accomplished? This is what his goal is. The goal is he also wants to see. So these paragraphs are obviously paratactically related. This is I want, this is I also want. So how is this? I just put it here as a kind of elaboration. What about 1024? There are two different paths the country can take. You remember the murder on the Orient Express? He says there are two possible solutions here. It's the same thing. There are two paths. So 1024 provides sort of the circumstances within which we can understand what's to take place, the background here. There are two paths. Now here, normally what I should be doing is telling you to look up those relations and how are we going to decide this. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip that. All right? But it's really how it should be done. You should look up the relations and their definitions to see, are we right? So, this is 1024. It is giving us sort of the background to what follows in, what is it? 1025 to 1031. Now, how does it break down here? It is exactly like that email letter in which you're comparing Hillary Clinton with Obama. Here, what are you doing? 1025 to 6, one path. 1027 to 28, the second path. The third path. 1029, 131. So we have three paths. How do they work now? The president's path, 1025, 1026. Which is the path that we should take? Well, obviously, Romney's path. What is the relationship here? Antithesis. It's the same here. 1027, 1028, same pattern, antithesis. 1029, 30 and 31, antithesis. The same pattern. What you should begin to see is, the more you analyze these texts, the more commonalities you find, the more patterns that you become aware of, and you become aware of this sort of inventory of possibilities as far as the rhetorical structure. And you don't ever just come to the text cold, like this is completely new text. I have no idea how to do it. No. You come with the background of text that you've analyzed before, And that cumulative knowledge is going to help you when you analyze another text. You're going to get so familiar with these various possibilities. Hopefully, it will begin to permeate your own writing. Hopefully, it will begin to sort of become aware of the possibilities. You become aware of how people do create text, which will obviously influence you yourself when it comes to your own writing, your own speaking. What I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to take the next two paragraphs, okay? And really get out a piece of paper. Don't just stare at it on your computer screen or your iPad and think that you can that way somehow come up with a rhetorical structure. No. Get a piece of paper out. Draw it out. Look at the text. Look at what do you discover as being sort of a kind of patterning within the text. So I hope that today has been helpful in terms of getting to become more familiar with, when it comes to the exam, how you can approach it and what you can be doing immediately. When you get to your exam paper, immediately you just start making the math, all right? Adding up these processes and looking at theme, looking at the patterns. And then when you begin to see the patterns, you begin to go beyond that and look at why is it that way? Okay. All right, so we'll stop there. Please take a look at the next two paragraphs. That's where we'll pick it up next week. And I'll talk to you about it. And the best would be you have your own idea about what it is. And